Hi everyone, this is Paulina Cameron with the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs. We're a Canadian-based organization that educates, mentors, energizes, and connects women entrepreneurs to be wildly successful, promoting strong economies and thriving communities. As part of our Pitch for the Purse program, this webinar focuses on the content of your pitch deck and the story that you will be sharing with your audience. Joining us today, we have Ryan Heit from Valhalla Private Capital joining us, and he'll be sharing his tips and insights as to what to include in your pitch deck. Regardless if you're pitching to an investor, your bank, advisory board, new employees, these are fundamentals to help you identify what to focus on and how to present it in a way that will be well received. How are you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. So we're going to dive right. Thank you. We're going to dive right in. So off the bat, what is the one thing that an entrepreneur should do when preparing their deck?
I think the very first thing you need to do is figure out who you're actually presenting to. You're going to need a different deck for every single potential stakeholder that you're going to chat with, whether it's a customer or an investor. And even within the class of investors, you're going to need the level of investor you're approaching. So know your audience. And look, we have a slide. Yeah, so on this one, I would suggest, customers, it's a little hard. You can't really say on the slide, you'll see, ask them what they want to see. You don't really have the ability to ask a customer, but the investors, before you're pitching, you're going to have an interaction with them to get a sense of who's in the audience or what they're looking to see. And there's no harm in just asking them what they want to see and then cater your deck accordingly. But the one thing you should focus on a deck is it is always a first date. No matter who you're chatting with, all of the due diligence, all of the extra conversation is going to come later. The first pitch is really just first date. So keep it high level and keep it brief and to the point.
And that's so true. I mean, I know when you're talking to a friend, it might sound different versus when you're asking for someone for money, that's going to sound really different too.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So when an entrepreneur gets in front of their audience and they're pitching, what goes on that nebulous, really important first slide?
I would always suggest that the first slide has to be tell them what you're going to say before you tell them it. So really, it's your elevator pitch, and you want to lead on the biggest value propositions that you have. Depending on the stage you're at, you're going to have, a best value proposition to put forward. But lead with it. You should be touching on kind of these three themes: is why should the audience care, why we should believe you, and why we should join, whether it's with our wallet as an investor or with our wallet as a customer. So if you can fit all that in 30 seconds, it's a great first slide. For as a counterexample, sometimes we see companies that will focus on the tech and focus on the linear progression of their company before they get to the fact that they're telling me they have 60,000 monthly recurring revenue on slide 10, at which point we've already lost interest on slide 8. So tell us what your strongest points are in the very first slide and then revisit it later.
Mm. So you're kind of talking about connecting with the feeling behind it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on the why we should care, you do need to focus on what is the problem statement, who are the people that are feeling the pain, and let me know that the customers are telling you this, not just you as the developer or you as the technical lead. It's not you telling us the problem and why we should care. It's your customers telling us what the problem is and why we should care, if that makes sense.
Right. So yeah, I mean, you're talking about the people for whom you're solving the problem or providing that need towards. And right. So sometimes we find that as an entrepreneur, especially as women entrepreneurs, they'll find themselves in a room with people who don't look a lot like them, or they're selling a product or service that they know maybe isn't solving a need that person across the table has from them. So how can they speak to solving that need when they know the person across the table from them, it isn't something that they have experienced or will necessarily relate to right away?
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, because we have I'll just quickly tell a quick anecdote. Like in our group, we do have a larger proportion of men than women, and we do have a lot of female pitches or female founders that are solving a problem catered towards females predominantly, and there will be one of those questions from a man, and it's almost inevitably one of the women investors on this side of the table, on our side of the table, will say, well, no, it's actually a real problem, don't worry about that. Like, we have to have our investors, our female investors, hype up to say, just settle down, buddy, we've got this. But if you don't have that friendly face on this side of the table, I think what you really need to do is let the customers talk. So if you have an investor that says, I don't actually feel this problem, I don't quite understand it, your best defense is saying, I've already spoken to X amount of people who would all say they're willing to pay, or I already have customers and are paying this much. Like, tell us that the customers know and that the market's there, and we'll believe you.
Right, and that's such a good way to position it of, there's X percent of this market that exists, and we've already talked to this percent, or we know that for this many, we're already addressing this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so when you're, the first couple sentences of that pitch matter so much. So how do you advise the entrepreneurs that you work with to start? Do you suggest by saying, my name is this, or do you start with a story? Do you start with a statistic? How do you kind of begin?
I would say it depends on who's pitching. So if you are one of those lucky people who has charisma and the ability to be a storyteller, start with a story. Start with something that hooks us. I am not one of those people, so whenever I make a pitch, I don't start with a story. I kind of start with market traction or a customer feel or an important value proposition, in which case I'll say, I'll start with, my name is Ryan and I'm here to blah, blah, blah. But if I can go straight into a storytelling because I have that ability, I would suggest that. It is always the story that sells.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those stories, they really, at the end of the day, we're humans, right? And so we connect so much with those values and those feelings, so that story can really amplify that for someone.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so whether an entrepreneur has a product or service, how do they go about first introducing what their solution or idea is?
Okay, so your first slide after your elevator pitch should be the product, and you kind of always almost start with the problem first, and then you go into the product. And one of the most important things about this product slide is tell it not from the developer's perspective, but from the customer side. So tell me what their problem is, and then tell me how their situation changes when they're using their solution. So don't tell me that your tech can do X, Y, and Z. Tell me that your customer saves X amount of dollars when they use us. So, something from that perspective. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a comment I would take to heart all the way through any deck, is keep it focused on the investor and the customer perspective, and not the tech perspective. And now let's say on the slide, you'll notice on the last part there, that if it's customer focused and you don't have revenue, you may be in a bind, or you may think you're in a bind. So from my perspective, if you have sales, put it on the product slide. Like, mention that you have sales and how much it is. If you don't have sales and you're too early for that, that's perfectly fine. You just need to make sure that you've spoken to customers. If you have some sort of beta testers on your demo, awesome. If you don't even have a demo built, but you're still pitching, make sure you at least have surveys or some sort of insight or testimonials about the problem that you're trying to solve. So again, it's still, even if you haven't built anything, you can still put it from a customer's perspective.
Right. And so those testimonials that you have, or that data, would you put it in like quotes on an actual slide? Would you just speak to it?
I would probably speak to it with maybe one or two. I guess it depends on how much data you have and what it is. If it's revenue, put monthly recurring revenue on this on the slides, basically talking about your product and how much it's selling. If you don't have it, then I would actually put a testimonial on the slide deck.
Okay. And that whole concept that you talked about, customer focus and not the tech focus, I really love that, because something that we also know is the most successful entrepreneurs are deeply, deeply passionate about solving the problem, not necessarily as equally in love with their idea or the solution for the problem, because we know that can change over time, right? Like, we know that based on customer feedback, based on what happens in the marketplace, your solution might have to vary, and you might have to iterate, and it might have to shift and change. But if your core focus is really what is the problem I'm trying to solve, you're always going to stay true to that. So I like that you're emphasizing here, focus on that problem and on that customer in a pitch to investors as well. Okay, so the next thing that every investor, potential investor wants to know is what is the opportunity here in terms of customers and sales? So what's the opportunity for what you can achieve here? So how can that be presented?
So after your product slide, which is the problem and the product, like you said, you're going into your market, and then how you're approaching this market. So that's on the next slide. It's the market and then the marketing. So there are two ways that we kind of like to see the market, and both of those kind of lead into the marketing. So if you tell us on a slide deck that you have X billion dollars out there to grab, and I'm going to grab 2% of it, no serious investor in the room is going to like that statement, because grabbing 2% doesn't really mean anything. It's not giving us a tangible idea of your plan or how you're going to get it. It's just you picked a number out of the air and no one believes it. But having said that, you have to start with this top down. So you'll see on the kind of the graph on the right there, you start with your total addressable market by some characteristic that you will define. You narrow down to a serviceable available market, and then further by something else you define. You say, this is the amount we're going to obtain, or our first target audience, and now we know the maximum amount of potential customers you're going to have. But you should be stopping there. You shouldn't just say, I've got 50,000 people in my city that I'm going to start with, and I'm going to grab 2%. Just stop before you get to that last sentence. What you want to do instead of that is go kind of switch gears and do the bottom-up approach. So I now know as the investor that you've got 50,000 people in the immediate geographical area that you're going to beta launch with, or something like that. Then you switch into bottom-up, which is how many people can you reach? How long will it take to close these customers? And what is your potential chance of success at each customer that you're estimating? So if you can only handle approaching 20 potential customers a month, let's just make it easy. Let's say it takes a month to close, and you expect to close 50% of them. I now know that in month 2, you'll probably have 10 customers. And I have something for me to measure as an investor. I have something to measure against when I see your progress. So get to the serviceable attainable market, change gears into here's my actual sales cycle, and from these numbers, my growth will then look like this. And what you've done when you, sorry.
And that's over a longer period of time, right?
Exactly, yeah. And that leads to, if you do it this way, what you're doing on the bottom up approach is you're telling us qualitatively your interaction with customers, how often you reach out to them, how much you're doing, and what channels you're reaching through them, or to them, I guess. And that really obviously brings the conversation from the market into the sales and marketing, which we're always going to want to see as well. So I think,
right, and you're always going to know what are the actions. Yeah,
Sorry.
Because you're looking for really hearing what are the actions being taken, right? So, okay, let me make sure I understand this. Let me try to summarize it. So first, you're going to start with the top down, which is, here's the overall big market, call it 2 trillion, whatever it is, the total, there's X number of people in the world that have this problem. Then you're going to go, okay, within that number of X, here's the total serviceable available market. So within that bigger bucket, here's how many we think we could achieve. And then what you're going to go is then go down to the bottom to show actually what we can obtain right now is this many per month. This is how long it'll take to close it. So here's what we see over, say, the next year, what we can attain, and then you can kind of see that gap closing. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Okay, and so now that you kind of have positioned, here's how much we think we can go after within this bigger market. Here's a little bit of how we're going to do it. What about the question of competition? Who else is doing it? What else is happening? I'm sure that must come up right around then.
Yeah, and you'll see here, competition is the next slide. You could probably put it logically in many different spots in the deck, but suffice to say, it needs to be somewhere. And what an investor, or at least investors in our group, are really looking for here is that a couple things, not who they are, but why you're better than the competitors in your market. And also, you need to have a really firm understanding of all the people in your space. If your competitor slide has 4 logos and then you move on to the next slide, it's a horrible slide. You need to kind of say, here are the biggest threats to our success. and we are better than them because of XYZ. And then you can, if you want, you can kind of pepper that with storytelling. Say, one of the best pitches, one of the best received pitches on the competitor slide that we see is someone that says, our competitor is this company X, and in fact, last month we were able to get 2 customers that left their platform and joined ours. So some sort of storytelling, some sort of anecdotes that positions you against them, either by technical specifications or customer testimonials again, or something like that. And really, where you fit in your space and why you're better.
Yeah, I've even seen sometimes like almost a graph that shows it, or even like columns which show, here are the competitors, here's their qualities or things that are important. And, even as simple as like X's, and check marks, like we have this, they don't, to show that differential visually really easily. Okay, so the next piece, so we have the competition covered, so who it is, and now we kind of dive back to the entrepreneur itself. And so what's the best way that an entrepreneur can position who their company is, aka who's building the company, so the team, and what do you do if you don't have a team?
So what the team slide really does is show the investors that you have minimized the team risk as best you can. So inherently companies are risky. Startups are even riskier. You're going to have the startup risk, technology risk, financing risk. If you have the best tech in the world, but it takes you another year to develop the product, and you're going bankrupt tomorrow, you're never going to get to market. And you've got marketing risk because you've never done it before. If you put team risk on that list, it's a bad thing because it's avoidable. So like you said, if you don't have a team, like a founding team, and you're solo, that's perfectly fine. But show us either your experience in the space and why startup is something that's not new to you, or if it is something that's new to you, find advisors, a board of advisors, possibly directors, but if you're this early, it's probably advisors that have the experience that you lack in the areas that you need. So I would greatly suggest, if you're really early, find a couple of advisors that fill a gap in the startup space or needs that you are lacking. And then
Yeah, and we've seen for some non-tech entrepreneurs do mentors, kind of auxiliary term used for there. And another piece I've seen perhaps more on the non-technology, but it depends too, is I've seen entrepreneurs put up what kind of education they've obtained. So if they've been part of like, a pitch for the first competition where they get that education, or they've been part of an accelerator program, or they've done some sort of boot camp or deep dive, I've seen them put that up as a way to also show that they're rounding out that experience.
Yeah, okay. That's actually a good point. A good slide will have the team members and their experience, and then logos of the different groups they've been associated with, or companies they've been associated with if they worked in previous companies.
Yeah, great. Okay, so going back to the money piece, because this is a big part of it as well, how to best showcase that growth and the possibility of what the financials can look like.
Yeah, so on the financials, everyone should know that no one believes a 3-year projection financials in a startup. No one will believe it, like, but you still need it.
Make a plan inspired, right?
Exactly. It really just exists to show what you're hoping to achieve. It shows, hopefully, if you do a good job, that the assumptions that you're using to build it, to build your financial model, and it gives us something like a measuring stick to chart your progress, basically. So if I'm an investor and I'm not ready to invest now, but I want to keep in touch, 6 months from now, I should be able to look at your financials and say, okay, how are they doing compared to what they thought? So it really is just, it's needed, but it can be high level for a couple things. It can be high level because no one believes them really, so keep it high level. 2 to 3 years is pretty much all you're really going to need. You don't need to go longer than that because we don't even believe year 3. And on your financials, I would have some sort of information, whether it's a chart that goes backwards in time or some data about your historical burn rate and how much has gone in to date.
And Ryan, for those who aren't familiar, could you define burn rate, please?
Yeah, so how much money you're spending in a month. A burn rate is basically how much money you're running through. Typically, a burn rate is kind of measured month by month.
And everything that you're spending in the month?
Yep. All money going out your door. So this is like a cash flow tracking exercise. How much money is going out the door and how much money is coming in the door every single month.
Awesome.
Well, sorry,
Thank you for that.
burn rate is just money going out.
Yeah, money going out. That's right. And I love what you said there, and I'm going to say it again just so that everyone remembers it, is really what the investors are looking at, or what are the assumptions that are going into building out the model, which is really important, because you're kind of looking to understand what is the entrepreneur thinking about, what are they not thinking about, how aggressive they're being with market size and with growth, et cetera. So that assumptions piece also, it's a good way to identify any possible risks that go into it. So that was a really big point. Thanks, Ryan. Okay, and so now that we kind of have this backstory of the financials, how does an entrepreneur then introduce how much they're looking for?
Yeah, so if I now know what so on the last slide, you don't need to go back to it, but on the financial slide, you're basically showing me, typically, if you're raising money, you're going to show me a year one that's negative, most likely. And so I need to know how much money, like the investors need to know how much money do you need to either get to a major de-risking milestone or revenue, which is a major de-risking milestone. And that's how you should kind of structure your raise. It's, raise how much money you need to get to a de-risking milestone that is typically paired with an increase in your valuation, like an inflection point in your valuation. So this deal slide, you need to take that into account. But what the slide needs to actually have is how much money you're raising, what is the investor going to get for that, whether it's convertible note and what are the terms of the note, or it's equity, and then what class of shares and what's your pre-money valuation, or any other structure that you've come up with. And then, as I mentioned, the use of funds. So where's the money going to go? And I would give advice to say just gear it towards a major milestone. I should say here that I know in Valhalla, in our group, we need this deal slide. Like every company that goes through to our forum will need a deal slide. However, in speaking with other angel groups, I don't know if we're in the minority, but we are not, this isn't the only way to do it. A lot of companies and a lot of investor groups don't ask for the deal slide in the pitch itself. So going back to our very first conversation, ask your audience to see if this is actually needed. For us, it is.
Good point. And so what if it's more of a lifestyle entrepreneur where they're not looking at a big exit? How would they position this? Yeah,
so for any investor that's going to give money in, there needs to be some sort of ability to get money back out. Otherwise, it makes no sense. If you're a lifestyle company, maybe right off the bat, that's going to eliminate some of the investors, but it may not eliminate all of the investors. You just need to figure out a way to get money back into the investor's pocket on this deal slide. And you could be creative there. If you're upfront and you're saying, this is going to be a lifestyle company, I'm looking for investors.
Ryan, do you mind just repeating that? It was a little bit muffled.
Oh, sorry. Which part? Tell me what to start. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, the part. So if you're basically getting creative so you're not going after a big exit, how you position it.
Okay. So let's say you're a lifestyle company. You are going to be precluding some of the investors because they're going to want an acquisition for their money to come back. But you can structure a deal creatively where the investors will still get money back somehow. Whether you have, extremely high revenues expected, and you can issue dividends and then they keep ownership, or some sort of buyout offer. Something needs to be on the table to show the investors that it's not just, I'll take your money, I'll build a great company, goodbye. It's, you give me money, I'll build a great company, I will get you money back through this mechanism. And so you're right, it doesn't need to be an exit, it doesn't need to be an acquisition, but figure out what it looks like for you.
Yeah, and that's such a great point because, I think nowadays when entrepreneurship feels like this big buzzword, everyone kind of looks at equity financing as the golden way of achieving it, or like the one model or structure. And it is really important for the entrepreneur to go through this exercise of thinking about what kind of money is going to support how they want to grow their business and what they want that to look like, because that should determine how and what kind of money they're obtaining.
Exactly, and I think I'd just do a quick mention here that angel investors are an individual person giving their capital to the company. Typically, if you say angel investor, you're kind of expecting the acquisition route, but a lot of angel investors in our group will have X amount of the portfolio in that acquisition model, but then some money will actually go to social good where they don't expect as great a return, or community building where it's a local company. There's a personal emotional attachment that may affect the fact that they either will or won't invest in a company that's not an acquisition target. However, once you get past the angels and you go into institutional money like VCs or private equity, you are basically setting yourself up as a company that is going to be acquired or trying to get acquired. Once you've taken that VC money, you have to be that. In the angel space, you can kind of modify your pitch to not necessarily be an acquisition or acquirable company, more of a payback or a dividend or some other model.
That's great. Okay, Ryan, just as we wrap up, any last nugget of advice?
Honestly, my only advice is be real, be personable, and kind of show your passion for the subject. If you are passionate, you'll get passion coming back from the room. So try to be charismatic, passionate as best you can.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ryan from Valhalla, for your time with us and your expertise on pitch decks and storytelling. And thank you for watching this webinar to everyone who tuned in. Our goal for this educational component of FWE's Pitch for the Purse program are tangible takeaways that you can apply to your business and to your pitching your business. You can find other webinars and other programs and educational components on fwe.ca. Thank you so much.